The ranger's name was Sarah Chen, and she had been working in Yosemite National Park for 17 years, long enough to know that the mountains kept their secrets close and gave them up reluctantly. She had started as a seasonal interpretive ranger in 2007, leading nature walks and giving campfire talks about the park's geology and wildlife, had worked her way up through the ranks to become a backcountry ranger responsible for patrolling the remote wilderness areas where few visitors ventured, and where the landscape remained as wild and unforgiving as it had been when John Muir first explored it in the 1860s. She knew the trails, the peaks, the meadows, and the hidden places that existed only on topographic maps and in the memories of rangers who had worked the high country for decades. On the morning of September 23rd, 2024, she was conducting a routine patrol in the area east of Tenaya Canyon, one of the most rugged and dangerous sections of Yosemite, a place where sheer granite walls rose thousands of feet and where waterfalls cascaded down cliffs in spectacular displays during spring snowmelt but dwindled to trickles or disappeared entirely by late summer. The patrol was part of the park's ongoing effort to document conditions in remote areas, to check on trail conditions and wildlife activity, to look for signs of illegal camping or resource damage, and to search for any evidence of missing persons from past years. Yosemite had a long history of disappearances: hikers who had ventured off-trail and never returned, climbers who had fallen from cliffs, swimmers who had been swept over waterfalls, and the Park Service maintained files on dozens of unsolved cases going back decades. Chen was hiking alone, carrying a 40-pound pack with camping gear, emergency supplies, and communication equipment. She had left the Tuolumne Meadows trailhead at dawn, had hiked south along the Forsyth Trail, and had then left the maintained trail to bushwhack cross-country toward a remote drainage system that fed into Tenaya Canyon from the northeast. The area was rarely visited, accessible only to experienced hikers willing to navigate steep terrain without trails. And it was a place where the Park Service suspected there might be evidence from a 2015 disappearance case that had never been solved. At approximately 11:30 a.m., Chen reached a location that wasn't marked on standard park maps, a place that rangers called the Hidden Falls, a small waterfall tucked into a narrow cleft in the granite, fed by a spring that emerged from deep within the rock, and that flowed year-round regardless of snowpack or drought conditions. The falls dropped about 40 feet into a small pool, and then the water disappeared into a crack in the rock floor, flowing underground through the fractured granite to emerge again farther down the canyon. The falls were beautiful, crystalline water tumbling over smooth granite surrounded by moss and ferns that stayed green even in late summer, when most of the high country was brown and dry. Chen approached the pool carefully, stepping on rocks to avoid disturbing the fragile vegetation. She was documenting the site with her camera, taking photographs for the park's Geographic Information System database, when she noticed something unusual behind the waterfall. There was a small alcove carved into the cliff by centuries of erosion, a hollow space perhaps 3 feet deep and 4 feet wide, accessible only by ducking behind the curtain of falling water. Chen could see something dark in the alcove, something that didn't belong in the natural setting, a shape that was too regular, too geometric to be a rock. She waded into the pool, the water numbingly cold even through her boots, and ducked behind the falls. The alcove was dark, sheltered from direct sunlight, and the temperature was at least 15 degrees colder than outside, kept perpetually cool by the shade and the spray from the falls. Ice had formed on the back wall of the alcove, crystalline formations that glittered in the dim light, and partially embedded in the ice was a camera. Not a modern digital camera, but an older model, a Canon DSLR with a substantial lens, the kind that serious photographers used. The camera was encased in what looked like a waterproof housing, a thick plastic case designed to protect the camera from moisture, but the housing had cracked and ice had formed around and inside it, freezing the camera in place against the rock. Chen photographed the camera in situ, documenting its position and condition, and then carefully worked it free from the ice using her multi-tool. The ice was thick, probably years old based on the layers visible in the formation, and it took her 20 minutes to chip away enough of it to extract the camera. The waterproof housing was heavily damaged, cracked in multiple places, but the camera inside appeared to be relatively intact despite the moisture and cold. Chen placed the camera in a waterproof bag from her pack and made a note of the GPS coordinates where she had found it. She radioed the ranger station at Yosemite Meadows on her satellite phone and reported the find. The dispatcher asked her to describe the camera in detail and to provide any identifying information. Chen examined the housing more closely and found a piece of duct tape on the bottom with writing in permanent marker, A. Martinez, 2015. The name meant nothing to Chen, but the date did. September 2015, 9 years ago. She told the dispatcher about the marking, and there was a long pause before the dispatcher responded, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "Sarah, that might be from the Martinez-Fisher case. 3 hikers who disappeared in September 2015. We never found any trace of them. Stay where you are, document everything, and wait for instructions. We're going to send a team." Chen felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cold water or the ice in the alcove. The Martinez-Fisher case. She knew the case. Everyone who worked in Yosemite knew it. 3 experienced hikers, Andrew Martinez, Elena Fisher, and James Whitmore, had entered the park in September 2015 for a week-long backpacking trip in the high country. They had filed a wilderness permit, had provided a detailed itinerary, and had been expected to return on September 18th. When they didn't show up, search and rescue teams had been deployed, covering hundreds of miles of wilderness, using helicopters and ground crews and search dogs. They had found nothing. No bodies, no equipment, no sign that the hikers had been in the areas they'd planned to visit. The case had been one of the most extensive searches in park history, and it had ended without answers, leaving families devastated and the Park Service with questions that haunted every ranger who had participated in the effort. And now, 9 years later, Chen had found a camera belonging to one of the missing hikers, frozen in ice behind a waterfall that wasn't on most maps, in an area that hadn't been part of the original search zone. If you've ever wondered how experienced hikers can disappear in a national park without a trace, how they can vanish so completely that years of searching reveals nothing, then what was on that camera is going to answer questions that have haunted families and investigators for nearly a decade. And if you want to understand how one frozen camera and the determination of a park ranger finally revealed the truth, then stay with me, because this story is about to take you into some of the most remote and dangerous terrain in North America. The recovery team arrived at the Hidden Falls site 6 hours later, hiking in from Yosemite Meadows with technical gear and additional documentation equipment. The team consisted of 4 people: Chen's supervisor, District Ranger Michael Torres, a criminal investigator from the National Park Service Investigative Services branch named David Reyes, a search and rescue coordinator named Patricia Vasquez, who had worked the original Martinez-Fisher case, and a forensic technician from the NPS regional office named Robert Kim, who specialized in recovering and analyzing evidence from harsh environmental conditions. They arrived at dusk, set up camp near the falls, and began a systematic examination of the site. Kim photographed the alcove from every angle, documented the ice formation, collected samples of the water and sediment, and searched the surrounding area for any additional evidence. The ice in the alcove was several inches thick in places, suggesting that water from the falls had been freezing and refreezing over multiple winter seasons, gradually building up layers. Kim estimated that the camera had been in place for at least 8 or 9 years, based on the ice accumulation and the degree of weathering on the exposed parts of the waterproof housing. Torres organized a broader search of the area, using GPS to map a grid pattern that extended a quarter-mile in every direction from the falls. The team searched until dark, using headlamps and portable floodlights to illuminate the terrain, looking for any other evidence, clothing, equipment, human remains, that might be associated with the missing hikers. They found nothing. The area around the falls was pristine except for the camera, showing no signs of human activity beyond the natural weathering and erosion that shaped every surface in the high country. The team returned to Tuolumne Meadows the following morning, hiking out with the camera secured in a protective case. The camera was transported to the National Park Service Evidence Laboratory in San Francisco, a facility that handled evidence from parks across the western United States, and that had the equipment and expertise to extract data from damaged devices recovered in challenging conditions. The forensic examination of the camera took place over the following 2 weeks. Robert Kim led the effort, working with a team of specialists who had experience with cold weather equipment recovery, water-damaged electronics, and data extraction from degraded storage media. The camera was a Canon EOS 5D Mark II, a professional-grade DSLR that had been popular in 2015. With a 24-105-meter lens that showed significant moisture damage, but that was otherwise intact. The waterproof housing had done its job initially. The camera had been protected from direct water exposure, but the housing had failed at some point, possibly due to impact or temperature stress, and moisture had penetrated the interior, corroding electrical contacts and degrading the rubber seals. Kim carefully disassembled the camera in a controlled environment, documenting each step with photographs and notes. The battery was corroded and unusable, but the camera's internal memory cards, a compact flash card and an SD card, were intact. The cards had been protected by the camera's body even after the housing failed. And while they showed signs of corrosion on the exterior contacts, the internal memory chips appeared to be undamaged. Kim used specialized equipment to clean the contacts and to read the data from the cards. The process was delicate. Any mistake could destroy the data permanently, but Kim had done this kind of work dozens of times, recovering data from cameras that had been buried in avalanches, submerged in rivers, or exposed to wildfire heat. The compact flash card yielded data first, and Kim transferred the files to a secure computer for analysis. The card contained over 800 photographs, along with metadata that included dates, times, GPS coordinates, and camera settings for each image. Kim opened the first image and felt his pulse quicken. The photo showed 3 people standing on a granite dome, mountains stretching to the horizon behind them, huge smiles on their faces, the golden light of early morning illuminating their features. Kim compared the faces to photographs from the missing persons file. Andrew Martinez, Elena Fisher, and James Whitmore. There was no doubt. The photographs told a story. Kim and his team spent days reviewing every image, organizing them chronologically, mapping the GPS coordinates on topographic maps, and creating a detailed timeline of the hiker's journey. The first photos were dated September 11, 2015, and showed the hikers preparing for their trip, packing gear, checking equipment, posing with their packs at the trailhead. The photos showed they had been well equipped, carrying modern backpacks, quality clothing, trekking poles, and what appeared to be adequate food and safety gear. The next set of photos showed the hikers on the trail, moving through forests and meadows, stopping at scenic overlooks, setting up camp in picturesque locations. The GPS coordinates confirmed they had followed their planned route initially, hiking south from Tuolumne Meadows along the Rafferty Creek Trail, camping near Vogelsang High Sierra Camp on their first night. Day 2 photos showed them crossing Vogelsang Pass and descending into the Lewis Creek drainage, with camp set up near a small lake that wasn't named on the maps, but that could be identified by its distinctive shape and surrounding terrain. On day 3, September 13th, the photos showed the hikers had deviated from their planned route. Instead of continuing south toward Merced Lake, they had turned east, climbing toward a high ridge that offered spectacular views, but that wasn't on any maintained trail. The photos from that day showed increasingly rugged terrain, steep granite slopes, boulder fields, narrow ledges above dizzying drops. The hikers appeared confident, moving efficiently, stopping frequently to photograph the scenery. One photo showed Andrew Martinez pointing at something off-camera, his expression excited. The next photo showed what he had been pointing at, a waterfall in the distance, barely visible through a gap in the ridge, tumbling down a cliff face that had to be several hundred feet high. The photo's metadata showed it had been taken at 2:47 p.m. on September 13th, at an elevation of 10,200 feet, at coordinates that placed the hikers about 3 miles northeast of their planned route. The next several dozen photos showed the hikers making their way toward the waterfall, navigating increasingly difficult terrain, down-climbing steep sections, crossing talus slopes, working their way into the drainage that fed the falls. The photos showed Elena Fisher at one point helping James Whitmore across a particularly exposed section, both of them roped together for safety. These were experienced hikers who understood mountain risks and who were taking appropriate precautions. The photos from late afternoon on September 13th showed the hikers reaching the base of the waterfall. But it wasn't the same waterfall that Chen had found. This one was much larger, a major cascade that dropped in multiple stages down a cliff face. The hikers had set up camp on a flat granite shelf near the base of the falls, and the photos showed them eating dinner, filtering water, hanging their food bags in a tree to protect against bears. The photos from the morning of September 14th showed the hikers breaking camp and this was where Kim felt the first hint of unease, beginning to climb beside the waterfall. The route wasn't a trail. It was a series of ledges and cracks in the granite, steep sections where the hikers were using their hands as much as their feet, places where a slip would result in a fall that could be fatal. The photos showed Elena Fisher leading, finding handholds, testing each placement before committing her weight, with Martinez and Whitmore following. About halfway up the climb, the photos showed a small ledge where the hikers had stopped to rest. One photo showed the view back down to their campsite, now several hundred feet below, the perspective dizzying. Another photo showed Eleanor looking up at the remaining climb, her face serious, focused. And then there was a photo that made Kim's blood run cold, a close-up of a crack in the rock, and wedged in the crack was a piece of what looked like old climbing hardware, a rusted piton from decades past, suggesting that someone else had climbed this route before, but that it was rare enough that the old hardware was still in place, never removed, never replaced. The next series of photos showed the hikers continuing upward, the terrain becoming even more exposed, even more dangerous. And then, at 11:23 a.m., according to the metadata, there was a photo that showed the top of the waterfall, and beyond it, an alcove carved into the cliff, the same alcove where Chen had found the camera 9 years later. The photos after that became more sparse, taken less frequently, suggesting that the hikers were too focused on the climbing to stop and photograph every section. There were a few shots of the alcove from different angles, showing that it was deeper than it appeared from below, a small chamber, perhaps 10 feet deep, carved into the granite by millennia of erosion. One photo showed Andrew Martinez examining the walls of the alcove, his face illuminated by his headlamp. The lighting in the photo suggested it was late afternoon or early evening, the sun having moved behind the ridge and left the area in deep shadow. And then there was a photo that chilled Kim to his core. It showed the entrance to the alcove from inside, looking out at the waterfall and the cliff face beyond. And in the corner of the frame was Elena Fisher, and her expression was one of alarm, pointing at something outside the frame. The photo was blurred slightly, as if taken quickly, urgently. The next photo showed rock, just rock. The camera appeared to have been dropped or knocked over, the lens pointing at the granite floor of the alcove. Several more photos followed in quick succession, all showing similar views: rock, darkness, blurred images suggesting the camera was moving or being moved. And then the photos stopped. The last image on the compact flashcard was dated September 14, 2015 at 6:47 p.m. and it showed nothing but granite and shadow. Kim switched to the SD card, hoping there might be additional images or data. The SD card had been used as backup storage, and it contained fewer images, mostly duplicates of photos from the compact flashcard. But there was one file on the SD card that was different. A video file recorded on September 14th at 6:52 p.m., 5 minutes after the last still photo. The video was short, just under 3 minutes long. Kim opened the video file and watched with growing horror as the story of the hiker's final moments unfolded on the screen. The video began with Andrew Martinez's face, close to the camera, his expression tense. He was speaking, and the camera's microphone had recorded his words despite the background roar of the waterfall. "It's September 14th, about 7 p.m. We're in trouble. We climbed up to this alcove behind the waterfall, and we found something. There's a cave, a passage that goes back into the rock. We went in to explore, and we got maybe 100 feet in when we heard a noise, a cracking sound like rock breaking. We came back out, and while we were out here, there was a rockfall. A huge section of the cliff above the alcove came down, and it's blocked the route we used to climb up. The ledges we came up on are gone, buried under tons of rock. We can't get down. We're trapped." The camera shifted, showing Elena Fisher and James Whitmore sitting against the back wall of the alcove, both looking exhausted and frightened. Elena was holding her ankle, and even in the dim light of the video, it was obvious she was in pain. Martinez continued narrating, his voice steady despite the fear that was evident in his words. "Elena twisted her ankle when the rockfall started, trying to get out of the way. She can barely walk. Even if we could find another route down, which I don't think we can, she wouldn't be able to make it. We're going to have to wait here and hope that someone comes looking for us." The camera panned to show the entrance to the alcove, the waterfall visible beyond, and then beyond that, where the rock face should have been, there was a massive pile of freshly broken granite, house-sized boulders, smaller rocks, dust still hanging in the air. The rockfall had completely altered the topography, had erased the route the hikers had used to climb up, and had created a new, impossibly steep and unstable slope that would be suicidal to attempt descending. "We have food for maybe 3 more days," Martinez said. "We have water from the falls, we have our sleeping bags and some gear, but we don't have cell service up here, and we're way off our planned route. Nobody's going to look for us here unless we don't show up at our exit point, and that's not for another 4 days. By then, if we haven't been able to get down somehow, we're going to be in serious trouble." The video shifted to show James Whitmore, who spoke for the first time. "We should have turned back when the climbing got dicey. We were so focused on seeing the waterfall, on getting up here, that we didn't think about whether we could get back down. That's on us. That's on me. I was the one who said we should try it." "It's not your fault," Elena Fisher said from off-camera, her voice tight with pain. "We all agreed. We all wanted to see what was up here." The video showed Martinez setting up the camera on a rock, angling it so that all 3 hikers were visible. They were sitting together now, huddled in the alcove, their faces illuminated by the fading daylight and by their headlamps. "If anyone finds this," Martinez said, looking directly at the camera, "we're in the alcove behind the waterfall in the drainage east of Tenaya Canyon. We're about 3 miles off the Vogelsang High Sierra camp area. The coordinates should be on the photo metadata. We're going to try to signal for help during the day, and we're going to try to find another route down. But if this doesn't end well, please tell our families we love them. Tell them we weren't reckless. Tell them we just wanted to see something beautiful, and we made a mistake." The video ended. Kim sat in the lab, staring at the frozen final frame of the video, and felt a wave of sadness that threatened to overwhelm his professional composure. 3 people, trapped by a rockfall, knowing they were in mortal danger, recording a message in case they didn't survive. And they hadn't survived. 9 years later, their camera had been found, but where were their bodies? Kim prepared a comprehensive report summarizing the findings from the camera and delivered it to David Reyes, the NPS criminal investigator, and to Patricia Vasquez, the search and rescue coordinator. The report included all the photographs, the video file, detailed maps showing the hikers' route based on GPS coordinates, and an analysis of what the evidence suggested had happened. Reyes and Vasquez reviewed the report and immediately organized a new search operation focused on the area around the hidden falls. The search was designated as a recovery operation rather than a rescue operation. After 9 years, there was no possibility the hikers had survived, but it was critical to find the remains and to bring closure to the families who had been waiting for answers since 2015. The search began on October 8, 2024, 2 weeks after Chen had found the camera. The operation involved over 30 personnel, including park rangers, search and rescue specialists, technical rope teams, and forensic recovery experts. Helicopters were used to ferry equipment and personnel to remote locations, and base camps were established near the search area to support extended operations in the wilderness. The search focused on the alcove behind the hidden falls and the surrounding area, particularly the slope below the alcove where the rockfall had occurred. The video had shown a massive collapse, and the search teams were looking for evidence that the hikers might have been buried by the rockfall, or that they might have attempted to descend the unstable slope and fallen to their deaths. On the second day of the search, October 9th, a technical rope team descended into the canyon below the alcove, rappelling down the waterfall and then working their way across the boulder field that had been created by the rockfall. The boulders were enormous, some of them 20 feet across, and the spaces between them created caves and crevices that were deep and dark. The team used metal detectors and thermal imaging cameras to search for any sign of human remains or equipment. In a crevice between 2 massive boulders, approximately 200 feet below the alcove, the team found a backpack. It was wedged deep in the crack, partially buried by smaller rocks and silt that had washed down from above over the years. The backpack was weathered and faded, the fabric degraded by years of exposure to sun and rain and freezing temperatures, but it was intact. The team carefully extracted the pack and brought it to the surface for examination. The backpack contained items that were clearly associated with the missing hikers: a sleeping bag still in its compression sack, a water filter, food wrappers, a first aid kit, and a wallet belonging to James Whitmore. The wallet contained his driver's license, credit cards, and a photo of his wife and 2 young children. The photo protected by a plastic sleeve that had kept it relatively intact despite the years of exposure. The find confirmed that the hikers had been in this location, and it suggested that at least one of them, Whitmore, had tried to descend the slope after the rockfall. Whether he had been carrying the backpack when he fell, or whether the pack had been thrown clear during the rockfall, was unclear, but the pack's location suggested a fall from above, a trajectory that would have sent Whitmore tumbling down the boulder field to impact somewhere below. The search continued. Over the following week, teams combed every accessible part of the canyon, searching under boulders, in crevices, in the pools and streams at the base of the drainage. The work was difficult and dangerous, requiring technical climbing skills and constant vigilance for rockfall and other hazards. On October 15th, 7 days into the search, a team working in a talus field at the base of the canyon made a grim discovery. Partially buried under rocks and silt, in a location that would have been directly in the path of someone falling from the alcove, they found human remains. The remains were skeletal, scattered by animals and weather, but they were clearly human. A forensic anthropologist who had been brought in for the search examined the bones and determined they were consistent with an adult male, based on size and skeletal features. Over the next 2 days, the team carefully excavated the area, recovering as many bones as they could find and searching for any associated items, clothing, jewelry, personal effects that might help with identification. They found fragments of clothing, including a tattered jacket with a patch that read Whitmore Construction, and they found a wedding ring engraved with initials and a date that matched James Whitmore's marriage date. The remains were transported to the Mariposa County Coroner's Office for formal identification. DNA analysis using samples from Whitmore's family confirmed what the forensic evidence had already suggested. The remains were those of James Whitmore, age 34, who had disappeared with his friends on September 14, 2015, and whose family had been waiting for answers for 9 years. But where were Andrew Martinez and Elena Fisher? The search continued. On October 18th, a team searching a different section of the canyon, about a half-mile downstream from where Whitmore's remains had been found, discovered a second set of remains. These were in a shallow depression under an overhang, partially protected from the elements, and they were in better condition than Whitmore's remains had been. The forensic anthropologist determined they were consistent with an adult female, and personal effects found nearby, including a distinctive necklace that Elena Fisher had been wearing in photographs from the trip, suggested they were Fisher's remains. The recovery of Fisher's remains left one person unaccounted for: Andrew Martinez. The search teams expanded their efforts, but the canyon was vast and complex, with countless crevices and caves and places where remains could have been washed by floods or buried by rockfalls. After 3 weeks of intensive searching, covering every accessible part of the drainage system, the teams had found no trace of Martinez's body. If you're wondering how 3 experienced hikers could die in a place where they thought they were being careful, where they had safety gear and communication equipment and all the advantages of modern technology, then stay with me, because the investigation into what happened after the video ended is going to show you how quickly things can go wrong in the wilderness and how decisions made under stress can turn a survivable situation into a tragedy. The investigation into the deaths of the Martinez-Fisher party was led by David Reyes from the National Park Service Investigative Services Branch. Reyes had worked dozens of cases involving deaths in national parks, falls, drownings, exposure, wildlife attacks, and the occasional homicide, and he approached each case with the same meticulous attention to detail, the same determination to understand what had happened and why. The evidence from the camera, combined with the recovery of remains and equipment, allowed Reyes to reconstruct the timeline of events with reasonable accuracy. The hikers had left Tuolumne Meadows on September 11, 2015, had followed their planned route for 2 days, and had then deviated from their itinerary to explore the waterfall drainage. They had climbed to the alcove behind the falls on September 14th, and while they were exploring, a rockfall had occurred, blocking their descent route and trapping them in the alcove. The cause of the rockfall was likely natural. Granite in the Sierra Nevada is subject to exfoliation, a process where sheets of rock split away from cliff faces due to temperature changes, water infiltration, and other geological stresses. Rockfalls are common in Yosemite, occurring hundreds of times per year, most of them small, but some involving thousands of tons of rock. The rockfall that trapped the hikers had been substantial, altering the topography significantly and creating conditions that made descent impossible. After the rockfall, the hikers had been faced with limited options. They were trapped in the alcove with food for a few days, water from the falls, and sleeping bags to keep them warm at night. They had no cell service. The area was too remote, too deep in the canyon for signals to reach any towers. Their planned exit date was September 18th, 4 days after they were trapped, and they knew that if they didn't show up by then, search teams would be deployed. The question was, had they waited in the alcove for rescue, or had they attempted to find another route down? The evidence suggested they had attempted to escape. James Whitmore's backpack and remains had been found below the alcove, suggesting he had tried to descend the unstable rockfall debris and had fallen to his death. Elena Fisher's remains had been found downstream, in a location suggesting she had also attempted to descend, possibly at a different time or by a different route, and had either fallen or succumbed to her injuries from the ankle injury shown in the video. But Andrew Martinez remained unaccounted for. Had he stayed in the alcove, waiting for rescue that never came? Had he attempted to descend and ended up in a location that search teams hadn't been able to access? Or had something else happened? Reyes organized one final search effort in early November 2024, focusing on the alcove itself and the passage that Martinez had mentioned in the video, the cave that went back into the rock. During the original October search, teams had examined the alcove but hadn't extensively explored the passage because it appeared to be a dead end, a shallow cave that extended only a short distance into the cliff. But Reyes decided to take another look. He assembled a small team of experienced cavers and technical rescue specialists, and on November 5th, they returned to the Hidden Falls site with specialized equipment for exploring tight spaces and for documenting what they found. The passage at the back of the alcove was narrow and low, requiring the team to crawl on hands and knees. It extended back into the rock for about 30 feet and appeared to end at a solid wall. But one of the cavers, a woman named Patricia Vasquez, who had extensive experience exploring caves in the Sierra Nevada, noticed a crack in the ceiling of the passage, a vertical fissure that might lead to higher chambers. Vasquez used a rope and ascending gear to climb up into the fissure, which opened into a small chamber about 15 feet above the main passage. The chamber was roughly circular, maybe 8 feet in diameter, with a floor of fine gravel and sand. And lying on the floor, partially covered by sand, was a sleeping bag. And in the sleeping bag were human remains. Vasquez radioed to the team below, her voice shaking. "I found him. I found Martinez. He's up here in a chamber. It looks like he tried to wait it out, but he didn't make it." The recovery of Andrew Martinez's remains took the rest of the day. The team carefully documented the scene, photographed the chamber from every angle, and then worked to extract the remains and the sleeping bag through the narrow passage. The chamber showed no signs of trauma or struggle. Martinez appeared to have died of hypothermia or dehydration or a combination of factors, alone in the dark, waiting for rescue that couldn't reach him. Near the sleeping bag, the team found a small notebook, similar to the journal that Cassidy Morrison had kept in the Route 66 case. The notebook belonged to Martinez, and it contained entries written during the days after the rockfall. Reyes read the entries that evening back at the base camp, and they painted a heartbreaking picture of 3 people struggling to survive in an impossible situation. September 15th, 2015. We spent last night huddled together in the alcove. Elena's ankle is swollen, and she's in a lot of pain. We've given her ibuprofen, but it's not helping much. This morning, James and I tried to find a way down, but the rockfall has completely changed the terrain. Everything we climbed up is gone, buried under rocks. We tried to descend the new slope, but it's incredibly unstable. Rocks shift under your weight, and one wrong move would send you tumbling hundreds of feet. We're going to wait another day and hope someone comes looking for us. September 16th. Still here. We're rationing our food. We have enough for maybe 2 more days if we're careful. Water's not a problem. The falls are right here and the water's clean. Elena's ankle isn't getting better. She tried to put weight on it this morning and almost collapsed. James thinks we should try to signal for help, so we've been using a small mirror to reflect sunlight, trying to catch the attention of any helicopters or planes that might pass overhead. So far, nothing. It's so frustrating being stuck here when we're only 3 miles from the main trail. If we could walk, we'd be out of here in a few hours. September 17th. James is going to try to climb down today. We talked about it last night and decided that one of us needs to go for help. Elena can't move, and I'm not as good a climber as James is. He's going to take one of the backpacks with some food and water, and he's going to try to work his way down the rockfall and through the canyon until he can get to a place where he can call for help or signal a helicopter. Elena and I are going to stay here. I found this chamber up in the rocks above the alcove. There's a crack you can climb up through, and it opens into a small room that's sheltered from the wind and spray. If James makes it down and sends help, they'll find us here. If he doesn't make it, I don't want to think about that. September 17th, later. James left this morning. We watched him work his way down the slope, moving so carefully, testing every hold. He made it about 100 feet down before we lost sight of him. We've been listening all day but haven't heard anything. No yells for help, no sounds of falling rock. We're trying to stay positive. September 18th. This was supposed to be our exit day. If we'd stuck to our original plan, we'd be back at Tuolumne Meadows right now, tired and dirty but happy. Instead, we're stuck here, and James hasn't come back. Elena thinks he made it down and is going for help. I think something happened to him. The slope is so unstable. One wrong step and you're gone. But I'm not telling Elena that. She needs to believe he's okay. September 19th. We're out of food. Elena suggested we climb down together, that we try to get out while we still have strength. But she can barely walk, and I'm not sure I can get her down safely, even if the terrain was good. We decided to wait one more day. If rescue doesn't come by tomorrow, we're going to have to try to get down on our own. September 20th. Elena died last night. I woke up this morning and she was cold. I think it was hypothermia. We didn't have enough insulation and she was already weakened from the pain and from not eating. I'm alone now. James is gone, probably dead. Elena is dead. I'm going to move her body into the chamber where I've been sleeping, where it's a little more protected. I don't want animals to get to her. I'm going to stay here a few more days and see if rescue comes. I have water. I can survive for a while without food. Please, God, let someone find us. September 22nd. I'm getting weak. I tried to climb down yesterday, but made it maybe 20 feet before I had to turn back. I don't have the strength. I can barely move. The chamber is cold at night, but at least it's out of the wind. I keep thinking I hear helicopters, but when I try to get to where I can see the sky, there's nothing there. I know I'm not going to make it out of here. I'm sorry, Mum. I'm sorry, Dad. I tried. I wanted to see something beautiful, and I did, but I'm not coming home. September 24th. Still alive, but barely. Can't think straight. So cold. Sorry. That was the last entry. Martinez had died sometime after September 24th, probably within a day or two based on the forensic evidence. He'd been less than 3 miles from the nearest trail, less than 10 miles from Tuolumne Meadows, where rangers and visitors pass by every day. But he might as well have been on the moon for all the good it did him. He had died alone, in the dark, in a chamber that would have been nearly impossible to find unless someone knew exactly where to look. The recovery of all 3 bodies allowed the coroner to issue death certificates and allowed the families to begin the process of grieving properly, with funerals and memorials and the rituals that help people cope with loss. But the case also raised difficult questions about the original search effort in 2015 and about why the hikers hadn't been found. Reyes conducted a thorough review of the 2015 search operation, examining the search patterns, the areas covered, the decisions made by the incident commanders. What he found was that the search had been competent and thorough by the standards of the time, but it had been hampered by incomplete information and by assumptions that had proven incorrect. When the hikers hadn't shown up at their planned exit point on September 18, 2015, rangers had reviewed their wilderness permit and had begun searching along their planned route: the Rafferty Creek Trail, Vogelsang Pass, Lewis Creek, and the area around Merced Lake. They had used helicopters to survey the terrain, ground teams to hike the trails, and search dogs to follow scent trails. But the hikers had deviated from their planned route on September 13th, and there had been no way for searchers to know that. The camera that could have provided the critical information, the GPS coordinates showing exactly where the hikers had gone, had been sitting in the alcove behind the hidden falls, frozen in ice, waiting to be discovered. The drainage system east of Tenaya Canyon had been searched, but only cursorily. It wasn't part of the planned route, and it was extremely difficult terrain that required technical climbing skills to access. The search teams had surveyed the area from helicopters but hadn't seen anything suspicious, and they had made the reasonable decision to focus their limited resources on areas where the hikers were more likely to be found. If the hikers had stayed on their planned route, they would have been found quickly. If they had been able to signal for help, rescue would have reached them within hours, but they had wandered off route, had gotten trapped in an area that was hidden from aerial observation, and had died before anyone realized where they were. The case became a teaching tool for wilderness safety and search and rescue operations. The National Park Service produced a detailed case study examining what had gone wrong and what could be learned. The study emphasized several key points. First, the importance of sticking to planned routes. The hikers had filed a detailed itinerary, which was exactly what they should have done, but they had then deviated from that itinerary without updating anyone. If they had used a satellite communication device to send a message indicating their route change, searchers would have known where to look. Second, the dangers of technical terrain. The hikers had been experienced, but they had pushed into terrain that exceeded their abilities, particularly given that they didn't have technical climbing gear or training in mountaineering. What had looked like an achievable climb had turned into a death trap when the rockfall occurred. Third, the importance of carrying communication devices. In 2015, satellite communication devices like Spot and InReach had been available, but weren't as widely used as they would become in subsequent years. If the hikers had carried such a device, they could have activated an SOS signal that would have led rescuers directly to their location. By 2024, satellite communicators had become standard equipment for backcountry travelers in Yosemite and other wilderness areas. The families of the 3 hikers were finally able to hold memorial services and to lay their loved ones to rest. Andrew Martinez's parents, who had spent 9 years not knowing what had happened to their son, held a service in their hometown of Sacramento, attended by hundreds of people who had known Martinez as a talented photographer, an avid outdoorsman, and a kind and generous friend. Elena Fisher's husband, who had raised their young daughter alone since 2015, held a service in Boulder, Colorado, where Fisher had worked as a landscape architect and where she had been beloved for her creativity and passion for the natural world. James Whitmore's wife and children, now teenagers, held a service in Seattle, where Whitmore had run a construction company and where he had been known for his volunteerism and his dedication to teaching young people about carpentry and craftsmanship. At each service, park rangers from Yosemite attended, representing the institution that had worked tirelessly to find the missing hikers, and that had never given up hope that answers would eventually emerge. Sarah Chen, the ranger who had found the camera, attended all 3 services, and at each one she was thanked by family members for her dedication and for her role in bringing closure to families who had waited so long. Chen became something of a reluctant celebrity within the park service, her discovery of the camera becoming one of those stories that rangers told each other as an example of why vigilance and thoroughness mattered, why you never knew what you might find during a routine patrol. Chen deflected the attention, insisting that she had simply been doing her job and that the real credit belonged to the recovery teams who had spent weeks searching the canyon and to the forensic specialists who had extracted the data from the damaged camera. But Chen also felt the weight of what she had found. She had given families closure, which was invaluable, But she had also revealed that 3 people had died slow, agonizing deaths, alone and scared, in a place where rescue should have been possible but wasn't. It was a reminder of how unforgiving the wilderness could be, how quickly a beautiful adventure could turn into a nightmare, and how important it was for visitors to understand and respect the risks. The case led to changes in park policy. Yosemite began requiring all backcountry travelers to carry either a satellite communication device or to file detailed daily itineraries with regular check-in points. The park also installed additional emergency communication equipment in remote areas, including solar-powered emergency phones at strategic locations that could connect to park dispatch even when cell service was unavailable. The Hidden Falls site where the camera was found became known among park rangers as Martinez Falls, an informal name that wasn't on any official maps, but that was used in internal communications and in the stories that rangers told. The site was not publicized to the general public. The Park Service didn't want it to become a destination for morbid curiosity seekers or for hikers who might attempt to reach the alcove and end up in the same danger that had killed Martinez, Fisher, and Whitmore. In 2025, 9 years after the hikers disappeared and 1 year after their remains were found, a small memorial plaque was installed at Tuolumne Meadows near the Wilderness Permit Office, where the hikers had registered for their trip. The plaque listed their names and included a simple message: in memory of Andrew Martinez, Elena Fisher, and James Whitmore, who loved these mountains and who remind us to travel safely and with humility in the wilderness. The case was featured in several documentaries and podcast series about wilderness disappearances and search and rescue operations. The camera footage and the photographs were released to the media with the family's permission, and they provided a rare and haunting glimpse into the final days of people who knew they were dying but who fought to survive as long as they could. One of the most powerful elements of the media coverage was the video that Martinez had recorded, his calm narration and his apology to his family. The video was shown in wilderness safety courses across the country, used as a teaching tool to illustrate how quickly circumstances can change in the backcountry and how important it is to make conservative decisions about risk. The notebooks that Martinez had kept, with their day-by-day chronicle of hope gradually giving way to despair, were transcribed and published with the family's permission in a book about wilderness survival and the psychology of extreme situations. The book, titled The Last Light: The Martinez-Fisher Tragedy and Lessons from Yosemite, became required reading for search and rescue trainees and was widely praised for its sensitive handling of the tragedy and its practical insights into wilderness safety. Sarah Chen continued working as a backcountry ranger in Yosemite, conducting patrols in remote areas, checking on hikers and climbers, and occasionally finding evidence of past misadventures: a lost piece of gear, an abandoned campsite, a cairn marking a route that no one used anymore. She never found anything as significant as the camera again, but she approached every patrol with the same thoroughness, the same attention to detail, the same understanding that anything she did might make a difference for someone in trouble. Chen also became involved in training new rangers, particularly in wilderness survival and search and rescue techniques. She used the Martinez-Fisher case as a teaching example, emphasizing the importance of systematic searches, of checking unlikely locations, of never assuming that absence of evidence meant evidence of absence. She told trainees about finding the camera behind the falls, about how easy it would have been to walk past the alcove without noticing it, about how a few degrees of angle or a few minutes of timing could have meant the camera was never found and the families never got closure. David Reyes, the criminal investigator who had led the investigation, retired from the National Park Service in 2027, but he stayed involved in wilderness safety advocacy, serving on the board of several non-profit organizations dedicated to educating outdoor enthusiasts about risk management. He gave talks at outdoor retailer conferences, at climbing gyms, at hiking clubs, always emphasizing that the wilderness was not Disneyland, that nature didn't care about your experience level or your equipment or your intentions, and that surviving in wild places required humility, preparation, and constant vigilance. The Martinez Fisher case became one of the most studied disappearances in national park history, analyzed in academic papers, discussed in training seminars, referenced in guidebooks and safety manuals. It was a case that had everything: experienced hikers, a detailed itinerary, modern equipment, a route that should have been within their capabilities. And yet it had ended in tragedy because of a combination of factors that no one could have predicted. The decision to deviate from the plan, the technical difficulties of the terrain, the rockfall that occurred at exactly the wrong time, and the remoteness of the location that made rescue impossible even when the hikers were relatively close to help. The case also sparked discussions about the role of technology in wilderness safety. Some argued that if the hikers had carried satellite communicators, they would have survived. Others argued that relying too much on technology could create a false sense of security and encourage people to take risks they wouldn't otherwise take. The consensus that emerged was that technology was a tool, valuable but not infallible, and that the most important factors in wilderness survival were good judgment, conservative decision-making, and the willingness to turn back when conditions became too dangerous. In 2028, Andrew Martinez's parents established a scholarship fund in their son's name, providing financial support to students pursuing degrees in outdoor recreation, wilderness management, and environmental conservation. The fund's mission was to support people who shared Martinez's love of the wilderness and who were committed to helping others experience wild places safely and responsibly. The first scholarships were awarded in 2029 to 3 students from Martinez's alma mater, UC Davis, all of whom were planning careers in park management or wilderness education. Elena Fisher's husband and daughter created a foundation in Fisher's name, focused on trail maintenance and wilderness access for people with disabilities. Fisher had been passionate about making outdoor spaces accessible to everyone, and the foundation worked to build and maintain trails, campsites, and facilities that allowed people of all abilities to experience nature. The foundation partnered with national parks and national forests across the country, funding projects that improved accessibility while maintaining the wild character of the landscapes. James Whitmore's family continued his legacy through his construction company, which began specializing in building and repairing wilderness shelters, trail infrastructure, and backcountry ranger stations in national parks. The company donated a significant portion of its services, working pro bono on projects that enhance safety and accessibility in wild places. One of their first major projects was building an emergency shelter near Tuolumne Meadows, a structure that provided protection and communication equipment for hikers in distress. The camera that had spent 9 years frozen in ice behind a waterfall was eventually placed in a museum exhibit at the Yosemite Museum in Yosemite Valley. The exhibit told the story of the Martinez Fisher tragedy, displayed some of the photographs from the camera, and provided educational information about wilderness safety and the importance of preparation. The exhibit included a replica of the alcove where the camera was found, complete with artificial ice formations and a simulation of the waterfall, giving visitors a sense of the environment where the hikers had been trapped. The exhibit was popular, drawing tens of thousands of visitors each year, many of whom left moved and thoughtful, many of whom made commitments to be more careful in their own outdoor adventures. Comment cards left at the exhibit often expressed gratitude for the educational value of the display, and many visitors mentioned that the story had changed how they thought about wilderness travel, making them more aware of risks and more committed to safety. Sarah Chen visited the exhibit occasionally, usually during her days off, standing in the artificial alcove and remembering the real place, the cold water, the ice, the moment when she realized what she had found. She often thought about the hikers, about their final days, about the choices they had made and the circumstances that had conspired to kill them. She wondered if they would have done anything differently if they had known how it would end, whether they would have turned back when the climbing got difficult, whether they would have stayed in the alcove and waited for rescue instead of trying to escape. But Chen also thought about the beauty that the hikers had witnessed, the photographs they had taken of spectacular vistas and pristine wilderness, the joy that was evident in their faces in the early photos from the trip. They had died pursuing something they loved, seeing places that few people ever saw, experiencing the raw power and beauty of the Sierra Nevada. It was a tragedy, but it was also, in a way, a testament to the human spirit, to the drive to explore and discover, to the willingness to venture into unknown territory in search of something extraordinary. The wilderness remained vast and beautiful and dangerous, indifferent to human ambitions and plans. Waterfalls continued to flow, rockfalls continued to reshape the landscape. Hikers continued to venture into the backcountry, seeking adventure and solitude and connection with something larger than themselves. Some returned with stories and photographs and memories that would last a lifetime. Some didn't return at all. The mountains kept their secrets, and they gave them up slowly, reluctantly, only when conditions aligned in ways that allowed the hidden to be revealed. A monsoon storm, exposing a trunk in the Arizona desert, a beachcomber finding a GoPro on a Bahamian shore, a locker discovered in coral caves off Key West, and a frozen camera behind a waterfall in Yosemite, preserved in ice, waiting 9 years to tell its story. These discoveries reminded people that the wilderness was not just a playground or a scenic backdrop, but a living, dynamic environment where consequences were real and where the line between adventure and disaster was often thinner than anyone wanted to believe. They reminded people that respect for nature wasn't just a philosophical concept, but a practical necessity, that humility in the face of natural forces was wisdom, and that preparation and good judgment were the best tools for survival. The story of Andrew Martinez, Elena Fisher, and James Whitmore became part of Yosemite's history, one more chapter in the long chronicle of people who had come to these mountains seeking beauty and who had found both wonder and tragedy. Their names joined the list of those who had been claimed by the wilderness, climbers who had fallen from El Capitan, swimmers who had been swept over Vernal Fall, hikers who had gotten lost in snowstorms or succumbed to altitude sickness or made simple mistakes that had fatal consequences. But their story was also different from many others because of the camera, because of the photographs and video and journal entries that allowed investigators and families and the public to understand what had happened with unusual clarity. Most wilderness tragedies left only questions and speculation, but the Martinez-Fisher case provided answers, incomplete, perhaps, but substantial, enough to give families closure and to provide lessons that could help prevent future tragedies. And so the camera remained in its museum case, a battered piece of technology that had survived years in one of the harshest environments on Earth, its memory cards holding images that had outlasted the people who created them. It was a monument to persistence, to the way evidence could survive even when everything else was lost, and to the dedication of people like Sarah Chen who never stopped looking, who understood that sometimes the most important discoveries came not from grand expeditions, but from paying attention, from checking unlikely places, from refusing to accept that some mysteries would never be solved. If you've followed this story all the way through, from the finding of the camera, to the recovery of the bodies, to the investigation that revealed what happened, then you understand why these cases matter, why investigators spend months and years searching for answers, and why families never stop hoping that something will surface to explain the unexplainable. And if this story has shown you anything about the power of evidence and the importance of thorough investigation, then consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on notifications, because there are more stories like this, more mysteries that seemed unsolvable, until someone found a piece of evidence that changed everything, and those stories deserve to be told and remembered and learned from.